July 12th, 1971, 1:18 a.m. Harlem held its breath tonight. 100 men sealed Lenox Avenue like a courtroom door. Inside the bodega, rifles waited, but nobody fired first yet. Frank Lucas wanted their king alive, and that changed everything. 2 nights earlier, a payphone rang beside the Red Rooster. Frank answered on ring 2, because ring 3 meant death. The voice was Lou Ski Parker, his street lieutenant again. "Boss, they clipped your driver on 145th, broad daylight today." Frank said nothing, watching steam rise from his coffee cup. His new Lincoln Continental idled outside, black paint swallowing lamps. He wore a gray suit, no tie, no mercy either. The dead driver was a warning from the Saints crew. Boss Calvin Cage, Rick's ran corners near Street Nicholas Park. Frank had been taking their customers without firing a shot. He did it with price, purity, and silence, not speeches. But Cage wanted headlines, so he killed a messenger first. Ski asked, "You want payback, or you want control, tonight?" Frank looked at his hands, clean, steady, almost bored still. "Neither," he said. "Bring me their boss breathing right now." Ski hesitated, hearing the trap inside that calm order too. If Cage came out, he admitted fear to his soldiers. If Frank went in, somebody's mother would scream eventually anyway. Frank's rule was simple. The street must feel inevitable always. So he chose theater, the kind that ends arguments fast. At 12:40 a.m., vans rolled from a garage on 123rd. A yellow Cadillac, a blue Oldsmobile, and 3 Buicks followed. Men checked stairwells, rooftops, fire escapes, and trash can lids. They moved quiet, but not secret because secret looks weak. The block noticed curtains twitching, radios lowering, babies suddenly silent. Frank's people took positions like police, except nobody wore badges. At 1:18, Frank stepped from the Lincoln, shoes clicking once. He nodded at Ski, then at the bodega door ahead. Inside, the Saints held 12 guns and 1 terrified cashier. Cage wasn't there. He was 2 floors up, listening hard. Frank spoke enough for windows, not enough for cops outside. "Bring Cage down," Frank said, "or I walk up myself." Nobody moved, because moving first makes you the example tonight. Frank waited, counting heartbeats, letting the silence accuse them all. A kid with a shotgun whispered, "He's got the street." Upstairs, Cage watched his men hesitate and felt power leak. He called Frank's bluff, and still his finger wouldn't twitch. That was the moment Harlem understood who owned tomorrow already. By sunrise, detectives logged the scene as non-event quietly. No shells, no bodies, just shaken men gripping useless steel. Frank went to his apartment on Edgecombe Avenue, 555 West. The elevator smelled like bleach and perfume from last night. In the kitchen, his mother's Bible lay beside ledgers open. Frank wasn't born royal. He was born watching hunger win. North Carolina taught him that men steal and men smile. Harlem taught him the extra lesson. Men remember disrespect forever. The driver's death wasn't grief. It was accounting for him. He paid people well, but he paid attention better daily. Cage's crew had one advantage. They were reckless together always. Reckless men shoot. Careful men talk. Frank planned both first. He opened a folder marked Rick's and tapped photos twice. A girlfriend in Queens, a sick uncle, a gambling note. Most bosses hide money. Cage hid shame, and shame cracks. Frank sent Ski to the Pink Lotus Club on 48th. There, a bartender owed Cage $2,000 in loose talk. Frank sent another man, June Bug, to a courthouse clerk. The clerk found a sealed complaint, domestic, filed under Calvin. Not proof for court, but poison for the corner boys. Frank knew reputations die faster than bodies in summer heat. Still, he needed Cage alive, because death makes martyrs sometimes. Alive, Cage could be used like a key in locks. Frank called a lawyer named Morrison, who handled troubles discreetly. "If police swing at me, I want shields," Frank said. Morrison replied, "Shields cost." Silence costs more. Pick one, today. Frank paid both, sliding 20,000 across a dining table. It wasn't bribery. He told himself. It was insurance only. Around noon, he visited a tailor on 7th Avenue alone. He ordered a black suit for a funeral he expected. Not a funeral for Cage, but for Cage's authority itself. In Harlem, a boss is a story people tell nightly. Frank planned to change that story in one evening flat. He drove past 145th, past the bloodstain already scrubbed clean. He saw kids playing stickball, laughing like nothing happened there. That laughter made him colder, because it meant forgetting works. At 6:05 p.m., Ski reported Cage would appear at midnight. Cage planned a meeting in the bodega's basement, counting cash. Frank smiled once, because basements have only one way out. He called every captain he trusted, and one he didn't. Bring men, he ordered, but bring discipline before courage, always. In his head, the street was already closing like jaws. At 11:52 p.m., the first van blocked the avenues north. Another van blocked south, and two more took cross streets. Frank's spotters climbed rooftops, carrying flashlights taped red tight down. The Saints noticed late, because greed makes men deaf fast. A lookout ran inside, yelling, "It's Lucas." Blocks locked down. Cage's lieutenant, Manny, raised a pistol and paced hard now. "Shoot through the door," Manny said. "Make a statement, first." Cage slapped the gun down. "One shot buys a war." Manny sneered. "We got numbers." Cage answered, he brought math. Cage knew Frank's math. Corners, cousins, girlfriends, rent paid late. Outside, Frank walked to the door without bending his neck. A kid inside aimed at his chest and couldn't squeeze. Fear is a kind of gravity. It pulls triggers away. Frank knocked once, polite, like a man collecting rent due. "Cage," he called, "come downstairs. Bring your hands empty." Now, from above, Cage shouted, "Say your business, Lucas, right here." Frank lifted his voice, calm as Sunday, sharp as knives. "You took my driver. I'm taking your crown tonight. Clean." A murmur ran through the bodega, men glancing sideways quick. Manny hissed, "Boss, let me put him down right now." Cage stared at a cracked mirror, seeing his future shrink. He knew blood wasn't the point. Proof was the point. Proof that Cage could be summoned like a dog outside. Cage descended the stairs slowly, hands up, eyes cold too. Frank stepped back to give space like mercy like bait. Cage reached the doorway and saw the street covered fully. Men on roofs, men behind cars, men in doorways everywhere. Cage swallowed, tried pride. "You think you can own me?" Frank said no. "I can make you harmless for life." Cage laughed weakly. "You gonna kill me in public?" "Lucas." Frank shook his head. "Death is quick. Shame is rent." Frank pointed at Manny and the armed boys behind him. "They will watch you give me everything they live on." Cage's jaw tightened. "What do you want exactly? Tell me." Frank said, "Keys, lists, names, and your mouth saying it." Cage looked at his soldiers, seeing loyalty turn into calculation. Behind Frank, Ski opened a briefcase, showing papers and receipts. "These are your debts," Ski said. "Queens, court, gambling, all." Cage's face changed, because private dirt became public air tonight. Frank leaned closer. "Sign, or I keep walking upstairs alone." Cage understood the hidden clause. Upstairs meant families, not fighters. He reached for the pen, and Harlem's night turned again. In the bodega, Frank laid papers on a soda crate. The fluorescent light buzzed like insects trapped behind glass forever. Cage's men formed a half circle, guns lowered, eyes burning. Frank kept his hands visible, showing confidence, not innocence ever. "Read it," Frank told Cage. Out loud. Every line. Now. Cage scanned the first page, a list of stash spots. Addresses on Amsterdam, 2 apartments on 149th, 1 barber shop. Frank didn't explain the business. He explained ownership instead today. "Those locations belong under my umbrella, starting this minute." "Cage, Cage's throat worked. "You're stealing my life," he muttered Lucas. Frank replied, "I'm collecting late rent from careless tenants tonight." Cage turned the page and saw the court complaint copy. His men leaned, reading things they weren't supposed to know. Manny's eyes widened, then narrowed, then slid away, embarrassed quiet. Frank said, "Tell them why they die for you." Here, Cage's pride fought his fear, and fear had better teeth. He cleared his throat and spoke to soldiers, not Frank. "I made mistakes," Cage said, voice cracking like cheap ice. Frank watched faces change. Mistakes are contagious when admitted publicly. Cage read the debts. 1,000 to Eddie, 5 to Queens. Frank interrupted. "And the complaint? Say what you did." Cage. Cage's mouth went dry. His men waited like jurors nearby. "I hit her," Cage said, and the basement air shifted. Not a confession to police, but a confession to predators. Frank let it hang, then pushed the final page forward. "Sign the transfer," Frank said, "and order them to disarm." Cage picked up the pen with shaking fingers, then steadied. He signed, each letter a small surrender heard by everyone. Frank nodded once, then asked for the keys, slowly too. Cage handed over a ring, brass biting his palm hard. Frank took the ring and held it high, trophy style. Then did the part nobody expected. He sat Cage down. He pulled a barber cape from a bag and snapped. Manny frowned. "What is this?" Frank said, "A new name." Frank draped the cape over Cage like a child's bib. On the cape, a stitched word read "Runner," bright white. Frank leaned in. "From tonight, you run for whoever pays." It wasn't blood, but it was worse than blood here. Cage's soldiers stared, realizing their boss had been recast alive. Frank turned to them. "Walk out. Keep breathing. Work tomorrow." One by one, guns lowered to the floor, metal sighing. Frank took Cage's ring, then Cage's glance, then left quietly. Outside, the street opened for him like water parting again. At 2:06 a.m., Frank's men melted away without celebrations any. The Saint stood in the doorway, stunned, holding empty authority. Cage remained alive, wearing the cape, staring at his shoes. By morning, 3 of his soldiers were calling Frank's captains. Corners switch flags faster than nations when profit whispers close. Frank didn't touch the Saints' drugs that night, intentionally either. He touched their future, and that's what scared everyone most. 2 days later, July 14th, 10 a.m., he attended church. Not his church, a funeral for a dealer named Reggie. Reggie had worked for Cage, then tried switching, then vanished. Now his casket sat under lilies, and mothers watched Frank. Frank with a new black suit, crisp, almost too clean. He sat front row, beside an old hustler named Teddy. Teddy whispered, "You made Cage sign." They say he cried. Frank didn't answer. He watched him watching back. In the third pew, a tan-coated man wrote notes. He wasn't Saints. He wasn't Harlem. He was federal today. Frank felt it, like cold air slipping under a door. After the service, Frank walked to Sylvia's restaurant on Lenox. At a back table, Ski placed a small envelope down. "From Cage," Ski said. "He wants to meet. Alone. Tonight." Frank opened envelope and found a Polaroid of his mother. She stood outside a grocery, unaware she was tagged today. On the back, a message. "You wanted shame. Here's yours." Frank's pulse didn't spike. It narrowed like a rifle sight. Cage couldn't have taken that photo alone. Someone sold access. Frank looked at Ski, and Ski looked away a fraction. Frank said softly, "Who followed my mother?" Ski swallowed hard. Ski replied, "Not me." Frank said, "That answer is expensive." Teddy arrived, breathless, whispering, "Feds hit the Saints, not you." Frank understood. Someone had redirected heat, using Cage as bait. The tan-coated man from church had been watching too. Frank stood up, leaving money on the table untouched still. "Ski," he said, "bring Cage to me at 9:30. Sharp?" Ski nodded, but his smile was thin and wrong there. Frank drove to Edgecombe, checking mirrors, counting taillights carefully. At the lobby, his doorman handed him a note, shaking. The note read, "Your friend Morrison talked. Warrants are signed." Frank walked upstairs, hearing every step like a verdict fall. In his apartment, the Bible was gone and were ledgers. On the counter sat Cage's ring, slick with someone's fingerprints. Frank realized the trap wasn't outside. It was home already. At 9:12 p.m., a black sedan idled below his window. Ski called upstairs, voice sweet. "Boss, Cage is ready now." Frank didn't go down. He watched from behind curtains instead. Two men stepped out, not saints, wearing plain shoes federal. They entered the lobby, and the doorman didn't stop them. Frank grabbed a duffel, cash, and the last clean ledger. He left through the service stairs, smelling fried onions below. Outside, Teddy waited in a green Pontiac, engine running rough. Morrison flipped, Teddy said. "But Ski set you up too." Frank said, "Take me to the Copacabana, back entrance quiet." At 10:01, Frank sat with a banker and a capo. The table held steak, olives, and a folder of warrants. The capo, Sal Vizzini, smiled like he already knew everything. Sal said, "Your war scared investors. The city wants peace." Frank replied, "Peace costs. I pay in silence and numbers." He slid the ledger over, showing payouts, names, and dates. Sal's eyes flicked. "You're offering insurance against prison for me." Frank said, "For you, for me, for everybody eating tonight." Sal nodded, then asked, "Where's Ski Parker now?" Frank answered, "He's learning what loyalty costs in Harlem tonight. In 3 weeks, corners change hands, quietly like paperwork done." A truck arrived at 3:30 a.m., delivering records to basements. A laundromat on 116th started washing cash through new machines. A club on 52nd paid Frank 20% for protection. A judge's cousin got tuition covered, and a case disappeared. Frank kept Cage alive, using him to calm the saints. Then Frank made one mistake. He wore a chinchilla coat. On October 31st, 1971, he paraded it outside the Apollo. Flashbulbs popped. A reporter asked his name, and he answered. That answer traveled to the same federal ears from church. At 4:44 a.m., agents hit Edgecombe with warrants and cameras. Frank wasn't there. Teddy drove him toward Newark, rain streaking. On the bridge, Ski called from a payphone, crying hard. "I did it," Ski said. "They promised my boy freedom." Frank closed his eyes. Betrayal had a child's voice now. He told Teddy, "Turn around. We're going back to Harlem." Teddy shouted, "That's suicide." Frank said, "No, that's ownership, still." They returned at dawn, finding Cage gone and silence waiting. Frank smiled once, because legends survive without witnesses.